Good morning, boys and girls. Today we are going to be starting a writing lesson, which is something that we have not done through remote learning yet. We talked about literary essays before we left school. We're going to do a quick review on what a literary essay is, and I'm going to give you a sneak peek of what your assignments are going to look like for the next 2 weeks. So, a literary essay is a kind of essay that's based on a story or piece of literature. If you remember, we had read the story Fox by Margaret Wilde and had talked about the characters Dog, Fox, and Magpie. We started to create ideas about those characters, and then we tried to find evidence that proved what we were saying. That's what a literature essay is. It's taking a piece of literature and writing an essay about it. You also might recall how you got your own story. Some of you got the story Fireflies, some of you got the story Stray, and some of you got the story Marble Champ, which you are going to use to write your own literature essay. Now, here's a quick sneak peek of what this week looks like. So, somewhere during this lesson, you're going to go back and listen to the story Fox by Margaret Wilde, just so you can remember what it was about. You'll do that after a little bit, and I'll let you know when to do that. You will then continue listening to this video and find out how to write a mini story in your essay. You will also reread your story on Google Classroom, whether it's Fireflies, Stray, or Marble Champ, to help you write mini stories for your story. And by Friday, May 1st, which is this Friday, you will complete your introduction and 3 mini stories. 1 mini story per reason. So, my class, if you were here before break, you have already completed your introduction and 1 mini story, which is on Google Docs, which can be found on Google Classroom. For the rest of you, if you do not have an introduction or a mini story, your teacher is posting a document on Google Classroom for you to use. Next week, you will be rereading your story again, Firefly, Stray, or Marble Champ. I will be doing another lesson like this one, but instead of mini stories, I'm going to be teaching you how to put quotes in as evidence. You will add 1 quote to each paragraph on your Google Docs by May 8th, which is next Friday. I will do a small lesson on conclusions, and you will add your conclusion to the Google Doc by May 8th. That will be your finished essay. So you will have an introduction, you will have a paragraph 1, which is going to be your first body paragraph on your first reason. You will have a paragraph on your second reason, you will have a paragraph on your third reason, and you will then have a conclusion paragraph for a total of 5 paragraphs. Right now would be the perfect time for you to click on Fox Read Aloud and to go in and listen to this story. Go ahead and do that now, and then come back to this video. Okay, now that you've listened to the story, I want to remind you what your teachers have probably already shared with you, but before we left from school, we came up with a thesis statement of dog is a good friend. We then came up with 3 reasons of why that's true. We said that dog is a good friend because he sees the good in people, because he doesn't give up on others, and because he's caring. Okay, now would be a great time for you to go ahead and pause the video and to go and read your story. Now, if you go on this page and click on stories, you will come to a page that will show you all of the stories. Your teacher has already assigned you a story to read, and you will notice that in mine, I already have a document which I will pull up and show you quickly a snippet of. It will show you who is to read what story. So if you see here, you can tell that Shymir, David, Javon, Gavin, Bradley, Adriel, Hunter, and Neela will all be reading Fireflies. Below that, Malia, Adriana, Lila, Bailey, Lane, Abby, Julie, Tylee, Nicole will all be reading Stray. And if I continue to go down, Brooke, Jazzy, Salma, and Darius will all be reading Marble Champ. Now, your teacher already has a list of who is to read what, which they will share with you in case you forget. The stories are all in here, and it looks like I have Stray twice, so I will put in Marble Champ. I must have forgotten that, which I will do here shortly. With that being said, after you read your story, I'm going to ask you to think about what your character can be described as. Now, some of you already did this, so if you're in my class, you already have this done, and all you need to do is look in your Google Doc in your introduction. So for example, some of my students in Fireflies group said after they were done reading, the boy in Fireflies is passionate about fireflies. That was how they described him. Some people in Stray said Doris, who is the main character, Doris is a sympathetic type of person, or Doris is a caring person. Those were some thesis statements. You want to make sure that you have a thesis statement that you can work with and prove. You're also going to be thinking of reasons why. And what I would do is when you're finished reading your story, I would go ahead and create a little boxes and bullets like we did here with Dog. Dog is a good friend, and I have 3 reasons why. Now, once again, if you're in my class, you already have this in your introduction. If you're not in my class, most likely you're going to need to come up with a boxes and bullets of a character from your story. Go ahead and do that and come back when you are ready. Okay, so hopefully you have a boxes and bullets about your character. If you're having trouble coming up with the boxes and bullets, make sure you reach out to your teacher to help you. After you have your boxes and bullets, just like I do, the next thing you want to do is you want to go to your Google Docs and write your introduction, which is very simple. You're just going to combine this all into one sentence. Now, if you look here, you will notice that I've already done this. Dog is a good friend because he sees the good in people, comma, he doesn't give up on others, comma, and he's caring, period. Now that is done, your introduction is complete. We are now ready to write our mini stories for each reason. So, what is a mini story? We're going to collect evidence from our story that proves one of your reasons. So, when you're telling a story of providing evidence for an idea, you need to angle that story to highlight that way it supports and connects to your thesis. So how do you angle a story? Well, we're going to begin by repeating the point you want to make, which is your reason. You want to use some words from the text, but not all words because that would be copying. You want to mention what the character does not do as a way to draw attention to what the character does do, and repeat the key words from the big idea or topic sentence. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Okay, so I went through the story Fox, and I had to find something that supported how Dog is a good friend because he sees the good in people. So I found this part right here. It says, after the rains, when saplings are springing up everywhere, a fox comes into the bush. Fox with his haunted eyes and rich red coat. He flickers through the trees like a tongue of fire, and Magpie trembles. But Dog says, welcome, we can offer you food and shelter. I felt like this was a part in the story that I could retell in a mini story kind of way, which I'm going to show you here. So I want to summarize that part. So I started off with 4 examples, since this is our first example of how Dog is a good friend because he sees the good in people. For example, one time Fox came into the bush looking scary. Dog decided to welcome him and invite him in. Now, if you're reading that, you're probably thinking, that's a short example. And I agree with you. I didn't really do much storytelling. So, in my next example, you're going to see how I elaborated a little bit more. For example, one time a fox came into the bush where Dog and Magpie lived. Fox moved through the trees sneakily, and Magpie trembled with fear at the sight of him. Dog doesn't show fear and tremble like Magpie. Instead, he is excited to meet Fox and welcomes him in for food and shelter. This shows that Dog sees past the bad things and looks for the good. Notice in this example, I was more of a storyteller, and I even told the reader what Dog didn't do to highlight what he did do. In that part where I said, Dog doesn't show fear and tremble like Magpie. Instead, he is excited to meet Fox and welcomes him in for food and shelter. Now, what you're going to notice is I'm going to then put this mini story into my Google Docs. So as you can see, I now have an introduction, and I even added a transition word for the first paragraph with my first reason. Notice how I said my first reason, Dog is a good friend, that's my thesis, is because he sees the good in people. That's my first reason. So the first sentence is just going to be you copying your thesis and first reason, and then I'm going to go into my example. And as you notice, for example, and I'm not going to read the mini story again, but I've highlighted why Dog's a good friend and how he sees the good in people. For these next two examples, I'm going to be sharing some other examples for reason 2 and reason 3. Okay, so when I look at my boxes and bullets, I've already found a mini story for how he sees the good in people. I'm now going to look for a mini story of where it shows he doesn't give up on others. All right, in the beginning of the story, I found a part where Magpie drags her body into the shadow of the rocks until she feels herself melting into blackness. Days, perhaps weeks later, she wakes with a rush of grief. Dog is waiting. He persuades her to go with him to the riverbank. So now I'm going to go ahead and write a mini story about that part. So here it goes. For example, one time Magpie drug her body into the shadows and fell asleep in the cave because she was depressed about her burnt wing. Magpie stayed in the cave for days, maybe even a week before coming out. When she woke up, Dog was patiently waiting for her, even though she had acted very rude to Dog before going into the cave. Instead of Dog leaving Magpie in the cave, he chose to stay and wait patiently for her to come out. This shows that Dog would never give up on his friends. As you notice, I stretched this story out to prove that Dog was a good friend because he doesn't give up. I'm now going to go to my Google Docs and I'm going to add my next paragraph for my next reason. And as you see, I've said my next reason Dog is a good friend is because he doesn't give up on others. I then wrote my mini story in here. I'm now going to work on my third mini story. So my last reason of why Dog is a good friend is because he's caring. I'm going to look through my story and find a mini story that I think I can retell about what shows he is caring. Okay, so I chose the first part of the story to show that he's caring, and this is exactly when Magpie comes into the picture. So I'm going to show you how I rewrote this mini story in my slides. All right, so I wrote, for example, one time, Dog comes across an injured bird named Magpie. Instead of eating Magpie, he gently carries her to his cave. Even when Magpie refuses his help, he shares with her that he is blind in one eye and that life is still good. Dog doesn't just leave Magpie to die. That should say doesn't. Instead, he decides to care for her. This shows that Dog is a very caring friend. Last but not least, you'll see that I've added my last paragraph besides my conclusion that I will do in the next lesson. So right now, if I scroll up, you will see an introduction, reason 1, reason 2, and reason 3 with 3 mini stories. hopefully you can do that on your own.